What if I told you Bitcoin was as secure as the atom? You see, just as it takes immense amounts of energy to break apart an atom in something like a nuclear reaction or in something like the Large Hadron Collider, with Bitcoin, it's also very similar, where it takes immense amounts of energy to break the security protocol built into the programming. And just as we see atoms holding their structure in space, Bitcoin is made in a similar fashion and is engineered to hold its value in space and time. Now, why does this even matter? Well, if you think about a captain of a ship, if a captain wants to successfully sail the sea and make it to his destination, he's going to have to think about the materials he wants to build his ship with. And so obviously you have several different options. In modern day, we use something like steel. And in comparison to something like wood, the first thing that you might notice is that wood is organic and so is subject to the elements far more and will decompose. And so what that may result in for this captain is spending more energy to replace the wood that is rotted at the end of his journey. And so what we see in this example is that in the universe, matter exists in various states, and that can be states that hold their form better, like steel, for example, and forms that don't. And so it helps to think about money as a choice between a material that you want to store your time and energy in. And so this is where gold comes in, and comes in as the preferred store of value. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit why and how that came to be. Now, to understand why gold has been the preferred store of value, I find it useful to look at some other examples of societies that used different materials, different matter, as a way to store their energy and their time. And so in the case of some Native American tribes, you had them use seashells instead of gold. And its supply was constrained by the tribe's access to the coast and their ability to trade. And so that created a constraint on the supply, which made its value steady over time. It slowly increased as the supply. It slowly decreased in value, as the supply increased slowly. But what we saw when the colonists arrived was that they were more easily able to import these seashells, more easily able to add to the supply, thereby decreasing the value of each seashell. And so what we saw is that the buying power of the Native Americans was destroyed. You can think about it like the federal government printing 40% of the money supply and destroying your buying power. And so we see this time and time again across history. We saw it with I believe it was the Yapese people with their rye stones, and it was the same deal with the colonists who came in, and instead of using their hands and sailboats to excavate these several ton stones in some cases, the colonists instead used TNT and their advanced shipping technology. And again, this destroyed the buying power of the native people and transferred it to those who could more easily produce their money. We saw this also with slaves in Africa, where the colonists' glass-blowing technology beat that of the Africans, giving them a greater ability to add to the supply, giving them greater buying power, thereby allowing them to more easily get the slave trade going. I think it's a often overlooked piece to how the slave trade was so successful, why it was so successful. And so through these examples, we see how people's choice of material uh, for the storage of money is important in the same way it's important for this captain. And this is where gold comes in and why it has been the preferred store of value and in some cases still is today. And that's because it's extremely rare. It takes tons of energy to excavate from the ground and to process. And it doesn't, not only that, but it doesn't tarnish. And so you can think about a seashell could fall on the ground and shatter into a bunch of pieces and it's no longer a seashell. Gold, you can find it in a shipwreck and it will still be gold. And so in this case, you see how everyone kind of has the same technology when it comes to producing this form of money. And that makes it where today we see its supply increase like 1% every year. And as such, this makes it a wonderful way to store your value, to store your energy. Because like wood, it doesn't rot. Or like steel rather, it doesn't rot. And so this is where the dollar comes in. Because if you think about using the dollar as your preferred material to store your time and energy, you could think about it like trying to build a house, with wood that rots 8 to 10% each year. In this case, you'd constantly spend time and resources just to keep it from collapsing, just to keep it at the same level of stability. And so the dollar is like that rotting wood. It's in fact like breaking the laws of physics, like bringing matter into existence. Einstein would say matter can neither be created nor destroyed. And so if you create matter, that means that the energy that does exist in the universe would have to be diluted because it's spread more thin. And so you see that what the Federal Reserve is doing, in a sense, is breaking the laws of physics and adding energy to the system disproportionately, which debases it globally. And so printing the dollar is like creating matter from nothing. It's a violation of the laws that matter cannot be created nor destroyed. And so it destroys your buying power. And so if you think about this, it makes sense why gold would be a preferred store of value, because it is fixed to the universe's laws. It's not, it's not dependent on the regulations of the Fed or, however they want to run things. It's dependent on our ability to use energy in the universe to extract it from the ground. And so that puts a constraint on everybody, where in contrast, the Fed has a constraint on everyone else. It has a disproportionate freedom to print money, to access energy, whereas other people have to produce it. They have to mine it, whereas the Fed just brings it into existence. And so just as steel resists entropy in space and holds its energy, gold also prevents a kind of monetary entropy where the energy and time stored in it slowly is lost, dissipates, decreasing the energy stored in that material. And so this is where Bitcoin steps in. And so like gold, it has a constraint on its supply. In fact, it has a fixed supply. So gold, we couldn't ever know how much there is on the planet. In Bitcoin's case, there's only ever 21 million. And so in the same way, steel is treated in a way in which it retains the energy and time poured into it, containing it in a secure way. Bitcoin was engineered and treated by Satoshi in a way where the proof of work, the watts, the electricity used to search for a long string of numbers which makes up the proof of work protocol, is secure. And so in the same way, when someone is sifting their gold pan and finds a piece of gold and has earned that because of the work they put in, when someone on the Bitcoin network uses their computation and happens to find this string of numbers, what's called a nonce, the network then transmits that fact that the person found that number, which takes immense amounts of energy. It transmits that to the network in the same way you could, wear your gold ring, and it secures that fact, not through violence like you may with gold, but through nuclear grade programming and cybersecurity. And so one of the differences we see with Bitcoin is that it has the potential to be a peaceful way to store value and energy. Because in the case of gold, what did we see the empires, the colonial empires, spread their tentacles for? It was for gold, it was for money, it was for power, and gold was one of the avenues through which to do that. And so we saw mercantilism explode, we saw slavery, we saw the Native Americans and the Africans almost eradicated to mine gold and silver. And so in Bitcoin's case, we are using, if it's renewable technology, renewable energy rather, we could be using inherently peaceful electricity to secure our time and energy, not behind, castle walls or Fort Knox, protected by people with guns and walls and all this money. Instead, it's secured by a network of computers spread virtually invisibly across the planet, secured by nuclear-grade cybersecurity. And so a key part of this security is something called the 51% attack. And what that is in order for someone to basically override the consensus on the network or the property rights of the Bitcoin on the network, someone would have to basically get a majority in terms of energy. And so in the same way with war, someone has to dominate you in terms of energy. With Bitcoin, you have to dominate in terms of watts. And so you have to use 51% of the energy being allocated to the network, which in this day and age is billions of dollars, in order to override the consensus, which is maintained by everybody. And so in order to be that one centralized entity saying, no, you don't own that, you have to basically dominate. You have to basically do a similar kind of tactic that the feudal lords did. And that's it's not feasible necessarily. You would have to have every nation state in the world coordinate to beat Bitcoin, which simply won't happen. They'll buy Bitcoin before they do that. And so just as an atom requires immense amounts of energy to be broken apart, for its security protocol to be broken, for the energy stored in its molecules and in its elementary particles to be released, Bitcoin was made by Satoshi in a way where it's constrained to the laws of the universe and requires an infeasible amount of energy to break. And so just as matter doesn't vanish, why should your money? Why should your government be allowed to play God, breaking the laws of physics by bringing monetary matter into existence, diluting the energy contained within your matter, within your money? Why should they be allowed to print our hard-earned time and energy like it's nothing? So look, matter doesn't vanish, and Bitcoin ensures your money won't either.